Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. Israel says that all civilians are in bomb shelters after Iran launched missiles into the country after troops from Israel launched a ground incursion into southern Lebanon. As missiles are launched from Iran, warning sirens from Israel's Home Front Command are sounding in Jerusalem and across the country. And Israel's police say that at least 4 people are known to have been killed following a shooting attack in Jaffa. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. We begin with the latest in Israel, where officials say that all civilians have been directed to bomb shelters. This after Iran launched missiles into the country. Warning sirens are reported to be ringing out across entire swathes of Israel, following on from an alert by Israel's Home Front Command. Well, this comes after a senior White House official warned that the US had information that Iran was indeed preparing to launch such a missile attack on Israel. Well, in another development, the Israeli police say that 4 people have been killed and 7 others have been injured after a gunman opened fire in Tel Aviv. Well, all this comes after Israeli forces entered Lebanon for what the military described as a limited, localized and targeted ground operation against Hezbollah. Meanwhile, Israeli airstrikes are ongoing in Lebanon. The IDF has confirmed strikes in Beirut, while Lebanese officials have reported that a building in a Palestinian refugee camp near Sidon has been hit. Well, for more on the situation, we can speak now to Simone Ledeen, who is the former US Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. Thank you so much for speaking to us. I mean, Simone, events couldn't be happening any faster, a very rapidly developing situation across the region. Let's start by talking about this Iranian missile strike on Israel. What are your thoughts as you receive this information?
Well, I think in a way we should, in a strange way, almost be grateful for this because the mask is off. Israel has been in a conflict with Hezbollah, which is a proxy of Iran. But until now, Iran has sort of stayed in the background, content to let its proxies absorb the damage of Israel's response. I think now, in case it wasn't obvious before, the cat is out of the bag. This is Iran directing all of these activities, and now I think we're in a new phase of this conflict, very clearly so.
And what would you characterize this new phase as being then, Simone?
Well, I think, as I mentioned, I believe that Iran has come out of the shadows. Iran has launched this ballistic missile attack against Israel, and now it's unfortunately a full-fledged war between the 2 countries. I believe this is also a demonstration of the failed foreign policy of the Biden-Harris administration. Because their stated goal for the last several years, and especially since October 7th, was to avoid a regional conflict. And instead, what we're seeing is this escalating regional conflict that has now brought us to where we are today.
Well, to be fair, I mean, the Biden administration did urge for ceasefires, it urged diplomacy, and it appeared until last night that that was their preferred course of action, although Lloyd Austin did give Israel the green light for this limited incursion into Lebanese territory. But you're saying that the diplomacy has been a failure. Is that the essence of what you're saying?
Yes, and I would use a different word. I would use the word appeasement. I think this administration has shown a policy and pursued a policy of appeasement toward the Islamic Republic of Iran. And I believe it's invited this level of violence. I believe Iran and its proxies viewed the United States as a weak country at the moment, and believed that now was the time to attack. Again, this began a year ago with Hamas attacking Israel. Israel defending itself, Israel going into Lebanon in the past days and attacking the leadership of Hezbollah in order to return its citizens to their homes in northern Israel. So unfortunately, this is something that Israel has had to engage in, has tried to avoid engaging in, and now, unfortunately, it's time to, I believe it's time for the United States to fully support Israel in its quest for peace for its population and citizens, and for the region. I believe after this conflict is over, and hopefully there's a decisive victory, I believe we can return to peace in the region.
There was a warning that came from Washington, a warning aimed at Iran, as it became apparent that this attack on Israeli territory was imminent. They warned of serious consequences. That's what Washington warned Iran of. What might we be talking of in terms of those serious consequences? What sort of scenarios can you envisage?
Well, it's hard to know what this administration means when it talks about serious consequences. It's also threatened serious consequences against the Houthis for their destabilizing activities in the Red Sea, and we really haven't seen serious consequences. Of course, there has been some response. For example, the targeting of the Hodeidah port the other day. And some would argue, actually, that was Israel's action and not the United States action, although reports do indicate that the United States was informed prior to that particular operation. But serious consequences in this context, it's hard to know what they mean, because, again, up until now, when talking about the U.S. With respect to the Islamic Republic of Iran, has pursued a policy of appeasement. And there are many things that the United States could have done to prevent the situation from escalating to this point. And they did not do it. I understand the focus on diplomacy, and I think diplomacy is important. But when you don't have the teeth behind the diplomacy, you have to have a stick along with the carrot. And when you're just offering a carrot without a stick, there's really it's really less appetizing. So I think that's where we've landed, and we're seeing that play out, unfortunately. And now I think we're going to have to follow this to the end. And I hope that our leaders here in the U.S. fully support Israel and their need to defend their citizens.
Yeah, we're just getting word from the Reuters news agency. They're quoting Israeli army radio as saying that some 200 missiles were launched into Israel from Iran. That sounds like a huge number. Does this sound a bit like what happened in April when Iran carried out a similar retaliatory, they would say, strike on Israel, or is this on a different scale?
Again, these are initial reports, but I believe this might be a larger scale than what we saw in April. Of course, every time one of these sort of escalatory actions, back and forth exchange of missiles or drones or whatever it may be, today it's missiles. I believe that that each side learns from that and they adjust accordingly. I think we're also witnessing, unfortunately, an ongoing situation on the ground in Tel Aviv with active shooters and mass casualty situation. So there are multiple sort of lines of attack that are underway, and I think, I think it's important to note that as well.
Yeah, surely. I mean, a very fast-moving situation. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, Simone Ledeen. Thank you very much indeed. Well, let's cross now to Tel Aviv and we can speak to our correspondent there, Trent Murray. Trent, just tell us the latest that you're hearing at this stage.
Yeah, Tom, well, we've just returned to our live position after spending about 30 minutes in the bomb shelter here, and that is because there were multiple signals sent out from Israeli Home Command advising Israelis to stay in shelter. Now, normally when there's a rocket attack, you will generally get one phone alert and then you're told to stay in place for about 10 minutes. What made this quite different was that there were 4 alerts sent in about 10 minutes apart. So that sort of tells me that there must have been multiple waves of missiles that they were trying to intercept. We have seen, just as I've come here, because we've left our camera recording, that while we were down in the bomb shelter, there was a direct impact somewhere behind me in Tel Aviv. It's a bit dark now, so I can't see the smoke, but there definitely was an impact based on 2 missiles landing here in this downtown area of Tel Aviv. Still very early days, but what the IDF is saying is that while those waves of missiles were coming, some 10 million Israelis were taking shelter based on those alerts that were sent to people's mobile phones.
Yeah, and Israeli army radio saying 200 projectiles were fired at Israel by Iran. Something similar happened in April, and I was just putting that question to Simone Ledeen there. Does this sound comparable to what happened back in April?
Well, it feels quite different actually, because back in April, you might recall, the Iranians launched a series of drones first from their territory towards Israel, and that gave Israel and some of the allies that support it some forewarning that something was coming, given it takes several hours for those drones to cover such a long distance right across the Middle East here. I think based on what we've just seen, the Iranians may have dug deep into their ballistic missile arsenal, because it's thought they would only take between 10 to 12 minutes to arrive. I think given that there was just such little warning and that those sirens started sounding very, very rapidly, very quickly, it would appear, I would imagine, can't confirm, but based on what we've seen, I would imagine that they've fired ballistic missiles that were just very, very fast travelling and gave people very little time to seek shelter. So I guess the big question right now is the volume that was fired. Did it manage to overwhelm parts of the Iron Dome defence system by virtue of the number? I guess given that we have seen some impacts here, I'm in Tel Aviv, some parts of the Israeli defence array were not able to shoot down some of those missiles that were fired from Iran.
Developments coming in hard and fast, things are changing very rapidly. We've got information that Ben Gurion International Airport is closed for all flights coming in and out. I suppose that's pretty inevitable under these circumstances. We're also receiving word of another possible terror attack at a hotel near Tel Aviv. We probably don't have much information on that, but there was an active shooting situation in which 4 people were killed near Jaffa, I believe. Just tell us a bit more about what you heard on that front.
Yeah, not far from our position, actually. It's probably about a kilometre that way, Jaffa, and we certainly heard a series of police and paramedic sirens blasting through the streets here, and could tell something had happened, and then the report started to come through that there was some sort of mass shooting. What we've learned subsequently was that it appears there were 2 gunmen, and there are some photos circulating on Israeli media. One of them was carrying what looked to be a pretty heavy machine gun of some description, and it appears that they opened fire at a tram stop as people were either coming off the tram or waiting for the tram. Some pretty gruesome footage circulating here showing a number of bodies on the street, and just as that incident was occurring, and there were paramedics down there treating people, and the police, I think, trying to ascertain the whereabouts of the gunmen, that's when the sirens went off for the Iranian missile attack. So it's obviously been a pretty dramatic and stressful hour or so, I guess, for Israeli emergency authorities, certainly here in Tel Aviv, contending within the space of 30 minutes or so with what appears to be a mass shooting or a terror attack of some description, as well as a major missile attack from Iran. You would imagine the Israeli security establishment right now is preparing to respond to what we've seen in the past hour.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for that. Our correspondent in Tel Aviv, Trent Murray, thank you very much indeed. Well, it's estimated that as many as 1 million people have been displaced in Lebanon as a result of the ongoing violence there. Well, today, the Lebanese Prime Minister, Najib Mikati, and the UN humanitarian agency appealed for more than $400 million in aid to help the people who've been displaced. Well, for more on this, I'm joined from Beirut by the head of communications for the Middle East and North Africa at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. May Sayegh, thank you very much for taking the time to speak to us. This must be an extremely complicated time for you and your organisation. What are you able to tell us about the situation on the ground today, and which areas have been most affected?
Yeah, good evening, and thank you for having me. The situation has deteriorated dramatically since mid-September. And as you have mentioned, there are now more than 1 million people displaced. If you go to Beirut, to downtown, to many areas in Beirut, you see people displaced, and they are literally sleeping in the streets. People have no safe place to go. We have seen, since the beginning of this escalation, that many areas are being affected now, and we have been seeing massive airstrikes all over the country, in Beirut suburbs, inside Beirut, in the Bekaa, in southern Lebanon. And this put a lot of pressure on the Lebanese Red Cross teams and volunteers who are responding and trying to do their best to support the affected communities and provide them with the urgent needs.
Yeah, and in terms of meeting the needs, I'm just wondering that in a situation where few flights are coming into Lebanon now, most commercial airlines have cancelled their flights. In terms of supplies, are things starting to run out? What sort of supplies are needed at this stage?
Yeah, it's indeed true. Now the Lebanese Red Cross, they have been responding since October 2023, and recently, since mid-September, the situation has deteriorated, and their now resources are depleted. And as you know, this puts a lot of pressure on the supply chain, given the security situation. So the basic needs are, and the eminent needs are now the medical supplies, the fuel to make the ambulances of the Lebanese Red Cross operational. They have 51 ambulance centers across the country, and their teams need fuel to be able to move these ambulances and attend to the injured and transport also the dead people. In addition to that, the funding now, it's also the appeal we launched. IFRC has launched the emergency appeal for the Middle East crisis. So far, it's only 12%. Now we get the funds, and still the Lebanese Red Cross need a lot of support, financial support, to keep their operations ongoing. IFRC, in the last days, they released 2 million Swiss francs from the Disaster Response Emergency Fund to allow the National Society, the Lebanese Red Cross, to respond in a timely manner, because the needs, as you know, in the shelters, it's not only attending the injured and providing medical services, it's also providing relief items, providing medicine, shelter kits, and knowing that more than 850 shelter locations are scattered all over the country.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. We're going to have to leave it there. May Sayegh, Head of Communications for the Middle East and North Africa at the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies. Thank you very much. Well, let's cross now to Washington, D.C., and we can speak to our chief correspondent, Simone Marks, who's standing by for us. Simone, these reports coming out of Israel, extremely alarming. We understand some 200 missiles were fired into Israeli territory. What can we expect by way of a response from Washington at this stage?
Well, we know that the Americans, of course, warned that this was going to happen, Tom, several hours ago. Highly unusual for them to go public with the detail of that warning, insisting that the United States was going to do everything possible to assist Israel in shooting down some of these missiles from Iran. And certainly early reports suggest that that may have been largely successful, although battlefield assessments will have to be taken, will have to take place by the Israelis, possibly with the assistance of Western intelligence as well. President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris spent the morning with their national security officials getting an emergency briefing at the White House. President Biden himself is due to be seen publicly in just over an hour's time for a completely separate event, but he may well face questions from reporters about what has taken place in Israel over the course of the last hour or so. As you know, Joe Biden has insisted that his administration is going to be ironclad in its backing of Israel's right to self-defense, despite what has been very evident, particularly over the last few days, the bruising of the relationship between Joe Biden and Benjamin Netanyahu, with Joe Biden on the sidelines of the United Nations reportedly telling people that he was livid with the Israeli leader for constantly saying things privately to the president and to Secretary of State Antony Blinken, and then pulling the rug out from under them publicly a matter of hours later. The United States and France, of course, also trying to advance a 21-day ceasefire in Lebanon that, of course, Benjamin Netanyahu derailed by taking that action in Beirut to eliminate Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, and several other senior Hezbollah commanders. But today, ironclad meant something in terms of the relationship between the United States and Israel, with, we believe, American assistance being offered militarily to Israel's efforts to intercept those missiles as they were on their way to Israel from Iran.
Yeah, we're hearing right now from the White House, in fact, that President Biden and Vice President Harris are monitoring the situation in Israel from the White House Situation Room. That's the latest we've got for you there. And as you were saying just there, to pick up on some of the points you made, and we may have to go back to what's happening in Israel in just a moment, but the Biden administration, as you said, has had some issues with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The Biden administration was rather hesitant to sound like it was supportive of an Israeli ground offensive. And then last night we heard the Pentagon chief Lloyd Austin saying that he supported a ground invasion by Israel, but with sort of some what sounded like terms and conditions attached. What exactly did he say?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to parse all of that. He spoke to the Israeli defense minister over the weekend and said, once again, as he always does, that the United States supports Israel's right to defend itself and vowed serious consequences for Iran were it to launch an attack. He then went on to say, we agreed on the necessity of dismantling attack infrastructure along the border to ensure that Hezbollah cannot conduct October the 7th style attacks on Israel's northern communities. So by talking there about dismantling infrastructure along the border, he was almost drawing a line and saying you mustn't go further than that. But then came the news this morning that the United States had learnt of Iran's plan to launch these missiles at Israel, and the Americans say they passed that intelligence on to the Israelis, which is very relevant given the strains in the relationship between the two countries, and much of that restraint from Secretary Austin appears to have evaporated. He put a posting himself out on social media saying that he had spoken with the Israeli defense minister again today. I shared that over recent days, he said, the United States has increased force readiness and continues to maintain significant military capability in the region. We discussed the severe consequences for Iran in the event that Iran chooses to launch a direct military attack against Israel. Well, Iran has now now done precisely that. So the next question for Lloyd Austin, officials at the Pentagon who will be briefing reporters soon, and indeed for President Biden himself, is what do those consequences look like, and how do you explain them if the aim of the United States here is to try and avoid all of this from spiralling into a much more dangerous region-wide conflict?
Yeah, and as we continue to follow these developments, the news keeps coming into us, different alerts coming to us from the various news agencies. We're just hearing now that Iran says it's ready for any type of retaliatory action taken by Israel. We're also learning that the order for those attacks on Israel came from none other than the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So if Iran is ready for Israel's retaliation, I mean, we're looking here at a cycle of retaliatory actions and a cycle of violence from which it's very difficult to see any way out.
And that is why, Tom, this is going to be such a test for the Biden administration, for the president, for the vice president, Kamala Harris. And remember, in just a few hours' time here, we're going to be seeing the only vice presidential debate of this election cycle between Governor Tim Walz of Minnesota and Senator J.D. Vance of Ohio. That suddenly is going to feature more foreign policy, I think, than we would previously have expected as a result of what's taken place today. Does the United States still have the capacity to persuade Prime Minister Netanyahu directly and the Iranians indirectly through back-channel communications to knock it off after this? Or are we going to see more reprisals, as Benjamin Netanyahu has indicated, against Iran? He even put a note out to the Iranian people suggesting that change in governance could be eventually achieved in Iran. Those are the scale, that's the scale of his publicly stated ambition. What role can the United States play in potentially persuading these two warring parties to step back from the brink? Or are we going to see that spiraling regional conflict that the Biden administration has worked so hard for several months to avoid?
All right. Thank you very much, our chief correspondent, Simone Marks in DC. Thank you. Well, let's get some analysis from the retired British Army officer who was the most senior British officer in charge of rebuilding Iraq. I'm talking about Major General Tim Cross. Major General Tim Cross, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us here on Al Arabiya. We're monitoring multiple situations today. Can I just start by asking for your thoughts as we look at developments unfold in Israel, where we understand that some 200 at least 200 missiles, according to reports, have been fired from Iran into Israeli territory.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this is not good news, but if I'm brutally honest, I'm not that surprised. I think Israel has obviously caused significant damage to Hezbollah in terms of its command and control structures and in terms of its overall fighting power and capability. And with all that's been going on there, and of course in Gaza and the Houthis and so on, I think Iran, who clearly is the sponsor for these guys, feels or felt that it had no option but to retaliate in some form. I'd rather hope they wouldn't, and they've made it clear up to now that they don't want a major conflict with Israel, as indeed did Hezbollah before that. I think they realize that Israel has got the capability of causing significant damage. But nonetheless, I feel that they felt that they had to retaliate. So the size and scale of this is really what we're talking about now. Obviously, the news is coming in, as you say, minute by minute. The issue is whether these missiles will get through, and then some of them, we're told, are ballistic missiles, whether they will get through and cause significant damage to Israel or not. And we know that the last launch of a significant number of missiles and drones and so on from Iran did not cause much damage, if any damage at all, to Israel. Most of them were shot down. I think 5 got through and ended up in the desert. So if that is the case again this time, and Iran feel that they have done what needed to be done, that may be able to draw a line under it. But of course, the danger is, and my experience, over 43 years in the military, is that it's the unintended consequences. It's the reality that these things always take you into places you didn't really want to go. And drawing a line under this in terms of retaliation takes wisdom from statesmen and women, mostly statesmen in this case, who have the ability to recognize that simply ramping up escalation and retaliatory measures doesn't really take you anywhere.
Yeah, and I mean, another developing element to all of this, the Supreme Leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, is in a secure location, says Tehran. So perhaps with in mind what happened to the head of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, officials have taken that decision to move him. Just with regards to the situation in Lebanon and the Israeli ground invasion, in your opinion, was Israel right to have begun what sounds like, in all fairness, the early stages of a ground offensive, or perhaps a very limited ground offensive? Do you think this was the right course of action, or do you think this is a mistake?
Well, the history in Lebanon is not great. We know that from previous, examples of these land incursions. On the basis of what I'm hearing, it is a limited incursion. And in that sense, if that is reality, then I think probably it will be okay. I mean, we have to recognize that Lebanon and Hezbollah have been launching rockets into Israel since October the 7th, on a regular and sustained basis. And therefore, a lot of Israelis have not been able to live in their homes and villages in the north. Now, that applies to the other side of the border as well, of course, as a result of what's been going on. So we've got the best part of probably 200,000 people and families not being able to live in their homes. Israel's intent is, as we understand it, to enable their families to go back. And therefore, I think what they're trying to do is to move into the north, take out some of these tunnels and weapons caches, and restrict Hezbollah's ability to, continue with these rocket attacks. But if I'm honest, I don't see that really being successful, because Hezbollah clearly have the ability to launch rockets from much deeper inside Lebanon than just 10 or 15 or 20 miles inside the border. So I can understand why Israel are doing this, but if I'm honest, I'm not sure it was, from a military point of view, how successful it will be.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm so sorry to cut you short. We're out of time. Major General Tim Cross, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. And that is... Well, that is indeed all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble's interview with the Georgian president, and at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, join me for Global News Today. That's a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives.